You decided to ask Derek if you could study the material too. You skipped down the hall, standing in front of the master bedroom door. You had a building sense of excitement. That was Derek's room. Not wasting any more time, you hit the door with a jaunty series of knocks. There was a rattling sound that came from within. The walls might be thin in this building, or your visit might have gotten a bigger reaction than you'd anticipated. Option 2 had an extra point in its favor, considering how Derek enthusiastically yanked the door open. Hey, how have you been? Good. I was messaging people. Would you mind if I took a look at the business records too?
Are you
Really?
serious?
He shook off the momentary bemusement. I shouldn't be surprised, huh? You're invested in that business too. Mr. Holden has more stake in it than my dad. Hmm, I've gotta make sure you do my dad justice. Besides, I'm here for Derek time. It's wasted out there. His eyes went wide, stunned and dazzled. The prospect of holding himself up for a study session wasn't as much of a long-suffering burden anymore.
Come on.
Come on in. The doorway wasn't large, so he had to back into the wall to let you by. He could have gone in ahead of you and left it open, but that wasn't his style. He was going to hold it for you. You passed on through the entrance and past Derek, stopping near the foot of his king-sized bed. The final piece of the Derek apartment puzzle was revealed to you for a complete picture. It was neat, and the space was well utilized as expected of Derek. You could see the fingerprints of the same prefab style the overall apartment had, and there were far fewer footballs and soccer balls lying around than his bedrooms of the past. The door gently closed, and Derek came over to where you stood. Thank you, Derek. I know you're busy. Hey, I'm never too busy for you. He presented the space to you with a flare, arm out stretched. So here it is, my room. It's no big deal, but the tour is really done now. He chuckled satisfactorily. It really was a treat to be allowed into his personal space, and so welcomely. It was a great one. His guide duties complete, Derek hopped into his chair to resume his other appointed task. He truly was a busy man. Wanna look this over? I've gone over those files already. They're all yours. He flapped the films in question over his shoulder. It was a fairly thick stack of both stapled packets and loose sheets of paper. You accepted the materials gratefully. Not everyone would be as accommodating as him. You wouldn't take it for granted. Thanks. You sat on the bed. The mattress was firm, clearly quite new, and it made for a steady seat, though still had enough cushioning to be comfy. You kept your legs dangling off the edge, directing yourself towards Derek. His nose was still in proverbial books, but you doubted he'd care about you making good use of his bed. Derek skimmed his eyes over page after page, hunching over his desk. It was an exact picture of what was happening before you got there. Or almost exactly. He likely wasn't talking to himself when he was alone, but now he had a study buddy to bounce questions off of. Derek asked you your opinions and perspectives and had someone to groan to when the details were especially dense and obtuse. Seeing the sheets firsthand, you wouldn't have been thrilled to go over it all by yourself either, but you didn't have to. You had Derek. It was a productive way to pass the morning. Then it was noon. You knew the moment it happened because a piercing buzzer went off on Derek's left. Thankfully, his reflexes were as sharp as ever. His phone screeched only for half a second before his hand shot out to silence it. The sound after that was a gentle tapping of papers. Derek gathered the files strewn all over into a single tidy pile.
Anyway,
Time to go. He reached for his phone once more, sliding it to the center of his workspace for later before pushing himself to his feet. He glanced over at you. Do you mind me kicking you out? I've got to change. No problem. After shooting you a thumbs up, the important business representative of the day waved you off. You got up from the comfy bed and returned to your own room. You hefted the big rolling suitcase onto the mattress and unzipped it wide to access what you had on hand. You happened to bring a more formal suit, just in case. Derek would be proud at how prepared you'd been. Balancing speed and care, you got into fresh, clean clothes. You attempt to get as many wrinkles out as possible. It was a semi-futile endeavor after how long they've been crammed into the compartment. Once you were looking as nice as you could, given the circumstances, you bounded back to the living room of the apartment. Derek was ready and waiting for you when you stepped out of the hall. He was smartly dressed in a pleasantly green shirt, short sleeve button-down shirt, and some tan slacks. It was quite literally the least sporty you'd seen him in your entire life, but the look really worked with his eyes. Those verdant eyes were focused right on your purple ones, at least when he first noticed you. After that, there was a moment when his gaze began to wander down over your choice of dress for the big event. His staring didn't linger long enough to be impolite. It was as if he'd perfectly calculated the ideal number of seconds for personal joys and the upholding of societal values.
you're
Hey,
seriously great.
I am not worthy. This is your vacation, and you're gonna spend the afternoon decked out around a bunch of strangers making small talk. It's okay. I wanted to do this. My vacation isn't any worse.
Aww.
Derek's hands went to his hip in a dramatic pose, ready for the adventure ahead. Let's go. You left the apartment behind, not knowing when you'd once more return home. Your and Derek's first date had begun, different than imagined, but no less exciting. The ride over was nothing but smooth. Even the city traffic felt lighter. The world knew you were busy people with places to be and had moved out of the way. Derek avoided any dead air during the short trip. He chatted boyishly about the organization putting on a social. His dad had attended one of their occasions last year, and from the bits and pieces Derek learned, they sounded like a professional group. By the time he finished dishing, he was pulling into the parking lot. The venue was a classy seafood restaurant right on the beach. In a way, it reminded you of Derek's condo, modern with pale shades and massive windows that went around half the building. Despite living in that area nearly your entire life, you'd never eaten there. Your family had your favorites and habits. This would be a new experience for you and for Derek. He had an attempt to start a new conversation. There was silence, and the sparkle in Derek's eyes revealed his inner pride. He was there as a true stand-in for his dad. They were equals in that way. Being there as he arrived was a moment you were grateful for. It was a brief drive, but with a long road behind it to get there. Derek briskly approached the door. His jaw was tightly set. His hands opened and closed slowly. Fittingly, he could be described as meaning business. You dashed to open it for him. You simply couldn't help yourself. It was in your nature, a part of your every being, to not let Derek always get the door for everyone else. Derek's focus was too narrow. His eyes were straight ahead. He didn't notice whatsoever when you sneaked ahead and grabbed the polished bronze handle from the side. You, somewhat awkwardly from your position, moved the door forward and opened it wide. He stopped in place, staring at the entrance as if it had appeared by magic. Only one more thing was needed to complete your stunt. You said two familiar words. After you. It took another second for the satisfying shock to fade enough for Derek to form a response. Thank you, Faye. How considerate. You pretended not to notice the teasing sarcasm in his voice and the angle of his brows too. You merely smiled innocently as he passed. Then you followed right after with a skip, letting the door swing closed behind the both of you. The restaurant had an arrangement of square tables, with each with a silky smooth tablecloth and a bouquet of flowers. You could tell they were real even from a distance. Ahead of the seating, a makeshift stand was set up. It had only a plain podium with a microphone, so not much else would be required for its purpose. There was a high arched ceiling with visible wooden support beams ribbing the framework. The whole dining area had been reserved for the luncheon. A sign had been posted up front, and there were name cards on each of the tables, and every spot had water already set out for the anticipated attendees. Other guests had arrived before and had already taken their spots. That answered the question of what you should do now that you were there. Figure out where you were meant to be. Derek stuck close by as you waved through the tables, glancing at every name tag you passed. Ultimately, you found the intended seats for the intended guests. At one of the center tables were two cards, one with Mr. Suarez printed across and the other right next to it with the same Mr. Holden. If they were expecting Mr. Holden, they're gonna be really surprised when they see me. Derek unconsciously ruffled his spiky hair, mussing it up despite the fact that you were certain he'd especially brushed it out before you left. They didn't get the memo. Even working professionals have organizational mishaps. He opened his eyes and smiled, saying it out loud had made him realize his own point.
Forget it.
Honestly, that's reassuring. Derek gripped each of the shiny designated seat tops. He tugged both out from the underneath the table. Then he patted the one with the Mr. Holden card before it. It's all yours, babe. You're gonna do the real Mr. Holden proud. Why, thank you. You accepted the position with grace and poise. The place next to you was filled right away. Derek propped his chin up on top in the hand he rested against the table.
Man.
Hey. He leaned in closer, amusement plain on his face. If things don't work out with this party, we can make a break for the door. That's always worked out before. You had to slap a hand over your mouth. The snort you let out wasn't business meeting levels of appreciated volume. Of course, not even a networking event could be dry with Derek around. He made everything fun. At least we're kind of invited to this event. It's better than crashing. That's the spirit. He behaved as if this was a normal meal between lovers. He was totally at ease. He placed a hand over yours. It was a sweet gesture, despite his smile looking quite wry.
Phew.
Man, I am glad you're here. Being responsible still gets to be a good time. And I'm gonna have to say thank you for doing this again. Some networking event is now a date with my amazing girlfriend. You find someone who can make that happen once in a lifetime. Derek winked, beaming bright. Only for you, Derek. Only for you. Derek's gaze lingered on you affectionately until you could no longer pretend as if you were alone there. The guests were arriving, and Derek sat back in his seat like a proper student. More attendees joined you around the table, both at your spot and throughout the rest of the space. The age range of the invited business owners was wide. Some looked to be triple in years to you, and some seemed even as if they were barely out of high school and everything in between. It made for an interesting crowd. Conversation didn't even have a chance to begin before a primly dressed server approached. White polo shirt, black pants, and a stack of single-page menus in hand. There was no need for them to explain why they were there, but they did anyway. Hello, I'm Gus, and I'll be your leader. I've got our options for the event here for you. The simple plain paper lists were passed around the table. They were printed just for the occasion, rather than a full restaurant scale of options. It had been pared down to the basics. Considering it was paid for by the event, you couldn't complain. Just let me know when you're ready. Gus watched over you with their now empty hand demurely resting in front of themselves. The selection was simple enough that they didn't offer to come back after you'd had time to read over the menu. It was likely for the best that every order was put in at the same time. Not wanting to keep the server waiting, you made your preference known. You ordered the salmon meal. Derek followed you up with a request for chicken. The rest of your group all got steaks. If they were getting a free meal, they intended to make the most of it. Gus jotted down the requests, cleared away the menus, and left with a thank you. The expectation of food stirred up an initial conversation, but the tepid early chatter faded back into nothing under the puffing sound of a mic being tapped. Every face turned to the front. A speaker stood tall behind the small podium that served as the grandstand of the event. The commencement of the luncheon was announced with great aplomb, and you were all welcomed with a warmth that felt personal, even though it was given to an entire room of people. The opening talk discussed their organization, showed appreciation for their sponsors, and praised the restaurant for the provided meals. A fair amount was squeezed into a short period of time. It had to be said, but they didn't have to draw it out. As quick as possible, the speech was ending. The floor is open. We invite you to socialize. We're all here for the same reason. See if you can hand out your card to 5 fellow guests before the event is over. At least 5, huh? Your eyes were studiously glued to the event runner. However, it was obvious Derek began to smirk. You could hear it in his voice. And even if he hadn't said anything, you would have known. That was a competition, whether the speaker intended for it to be or not, and of course Derek would be game for it. You chuckled softly to yourself. There you went again. Completely unaware of the fighting spirit their words had roused, the speaker stepped down. From there, mingling began. One of the older, graying individuals at your table broke the ice. You described them as grizzled yet refined. Time had chiseled their features rather than worn them out. This couldn't this couldn't have been their first event of this type. Well, we ought to introduce ourselves to the people here before going to the masses. Agreeing nods and murmurs followed, starting with Jamil, the man who suggested the idea. The group went clockwise around, taking turns giving their name and a few details on their business. Jamil owned a photography studio. Oh, there was someone who did web design with a fully online business, and another who brewed their own beer. When Derek's time came, he stood as if he had called to the front of the class. No one else got out of their chair to give their introductions, but he wasn't one to do anything half-heartedly. My name is
Hello.
Derek Suarez. I don't own business, at least not yet, but I am here as a stand-in for a small, self-made company. It's nice to meet you. Before the spotlight could pass from him, Derek reached into his pocket to retrieve the stack of business cards for his father's company. Here you go. I've got enough of these for everyone. Gotta do what the speaker said, right? Derek used the extra height he had while on his feet to reach across the table and make certain every person received a card from him. He even let you have one. Some shook their hands and laughed while accepting Derek's offering. A couple traded Derek a card in return of his. With a base score of 5, he was off to a great start. Derek confidently lowered himself into his chair once more, then gestured to you. My turn. I'm Faye Madison. I too am a representative of that business Derek mentioned. Understanding smiles were pointed in your direction. You thought you made a good first impression. Only one more person needed to go after you to complete the lightning round of self-introductions. With that, the group could pursue their own goals. The beer persons struck up a conversation with the designer about their own site and how it didn't exist. She only had an Instagram at the moment. Jamil was familiar with many people in attendance and went to make his own rounds. Derek shifted closer to you, a grin across his eager face.
Let's
Let's
to
give out some more cards. He invited you to pass out business details with as much as enthusiasm as he would have asked you to play an actual video game. Apparently, that sounded equally as fun to him. That was fine in your mind. The two of you excused yourselves from the assigned seats. Derek surveyed the room for new card receiving targets. Derek set his sights on a small collection of people gathered a few tables away. He pointed subtly with his fingers to wordlessly signal his intention. You gazed back at him unwaveringly. Together, you approached the fellow attendees. Derek announced himself with a polite wave. Hey! 3 mature faces turned towards him. All were dressed on the business end of business casual, having elected to wear dress shirts and pants in unbuttoned blazers. What are we talking about over here? We're catching up on what's happened in the interim since our last gathering. I don't recollect seeing you there. Who might you be? Are you here together? New business partners? The questions were posed genuinely, and there was nothing unique about them. They were quandaries you'd heard before and could easily imagine hearing numerous more times before the event's end. But the way they asked, the more casual the circumstances were, then the round table greeting from only minutes before had stirred a chance in Derek. His eyes went wide, his made-up card-based competition was forgotten. Being a proper representative for his father was forgotten. The situation had become nothing other than an opportunity to introduce not just himself or you, but the two of you together. The only people he'd been able to tout his new relationship to thus far had been your own families. A wide grin played out over his face. This networking event had afforded him a real opportunity. It wasn't one he'd miss. No, we're not business partners, but we're partners in a different way. Tilting his chin high, putting a hand on your shoulder, and pausing for effect, Derek clearly stated your situation. We're a couple. He was positively beaming. Derek wouldn't have been prouder to declare he was in fact a business owner in his own right. Derek's boldness filled you with a pride of your own. What my boyfriend said. I'm Faye. Hearing you speak your own name cut through Derek's dreamy, romantic haze. There was still a job to do. He jumped off of Cloud 9 to join the rest of the party on planet Earth and properly answered the original question. Oh, and my name's Derek. My dad and her dad own the business. We're here as representatives for it. You might know them, Mr. Gregory Suarez and Mr. Cliff Holden. Ah! Exclamations of understanding came from the entire bunch of all at once. That made complete sense. Each took turns chattering about how they personally knew Derek's father and how they had heard tales of the enigmatic Mr. Holden. Every one of them noted amazement on meeting their children. Gregory had mentioned Derek on numerous occasions, and there he was in the flesh. And they were eager to get more of a glimpse into Cliff through you. Derek patiently listened and participated in light conversation. The picture of civility, the other guests had no clue that he was waiting for the right moment to strike. But as soon as it could be brought up, Derek offered the little crowd his card. They accepted without hesitation. Another successful round for Mr. Derek Suarez. He continued to network for a little longer until more than enough info had been given and received. Then you separated from the group with a friendly farewell. Smiling surreptitiously, Derek whispered into your ear excitedly.
All right.
This is going good. That's already more than 5. We're awesome. Not just awesome, professional. Totally. You continued to work the room together. You tag-teamed conversation after conversation. Together you managed to keep things flowing and provide setups for the other to nonchalantly bring up the cards or leave the exchange. You could practically see all the points you were ranking up on a fictional scoreboard. Eventually, another person took the stand. It wasn't the event speaker, it was a server at the restaurant, likely the head waiter. They requested all guests take their seats as the meal was ready to be served. The crowd murmured with interest as they filtered back into their designated seats, you and Derek included. No sooner than every butt hitting a chair did the servers stream out from the back. Derek's chicken dinner and your salmon were placed on the table. Your grilled salmon and Derek's roasted chicken breast were well seasoned with flecks of black pepper and green parsley. The sides were the same for the both of you, mashed potatoes with the same set of herbs and spices, and a neat pile of roasted zucchini and squash. All talk of business was off the table while eating. The elderly of your bunch declared that was truly tasteless. It was a pleasant meal and a well-earned break. As people began to finish their dishes, the table emptied out once more. Some wanted to chase down the people who were placed at the other spots before it was too late. Others were bold enough to leave the event early. Eventually, only you and Derek were left seated. He was leaning against his chair back, watching the activity of the room without participating. There was contentment in his features. He didn't need to push even harder, to use every possible second to make progress. Derek made a good effort, and that was enough. He'd rather talk to you.
Well.
So, he got comfortable for the wait, resting his chin on his fist and looking across the table at you with a cheeky grin. How did I do on our first super official date? You don't have to hold back. I can take constructive feedback. It was a lovely day, Derek. Oh, that's awesome. Your and everyone else's conversation was brought to a pause by the return of the event speaker to the stage. You blinked in confusion as their voice projected through the air. For a minute, you'd forgotten there was a speaker and that you were in a fancy restaurant for a business event. It had been just you and Derek hanging out as you usually did. And that turned out to not be far from the truth. The event runner announced the closing of the luncheon. They briefly mentioned future opportunities, but once again wrapped up their talk in a matter of minutes. Thank you all for your attendance. We know how valuable your time is. Please have a wonderful, productive day. It was on that note the business luncheon came to its end. The former speaker stepped down, and the guests leisurely prepared to leave. The ones who'd been itching to go were already out. Those left were content to linger. Neither you or Derek rushed. You were part of the camp who'd fully committed to attending the event. Proper goodbyes were given to the entrepreneurs you'd met that day. You made sure you had all your provisions, and only then you leave the restaurant and get into the car. Derek tugged at his loosely buttoned collar. It wasn't tight fit in reality, but what the shirt represented still pulled around his neck. He clearly had plenty of energy to muster. Derek beat his hands against the car's console like a drumroll. Success. We did that justice and fulfilled our important adult favor. Through narrowed eyes, he spoke the second victory of the occasion, one he had decided on all by himself. There's no way someone else gave out more cards than us. We are the champions. You giggled, and so he did. So did he. While also letting his gaze drift out through the window, he stared at the sky. That took a decent chunk of the day, and it's not totally done. Since we did it, I'm going to have to talk to my dad about it. He knows those people and will want updates, and some are new, and he could use a heads up. I can pass on the few cards we did get. Want me to drop you off at home or some other place, or are you coming with? You leveled a glance at him. Do you even have to ask? You're not getting rid of me. Besides, I have to tell Mr. Suarez my version of the events. His cheeks and eyes lifted, pleased. You were more grateful than ever to be there, and at the venue of a business luncheon in the state you grew up in, and at the side of your boyfriend. I thought you might say that.
Leave it to me.
We'll stop at the apartment to change, and then we can head out again. Great. Derek put the car in reverse, and you were off. Imagining Mr. Suarez waiting expectantly for your report spurred the both of you on. It wouldn't be responsible to twaddle. You arrived at the apartment, changed into your actual clothes, and got back into Derek's car in a flurry.